Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time. And I am so excited to be back and to be back to filming and editing and talking to you guys. I really missed it, so I hope you're as excited as me to be back and to continue the conversation. Today I thought we'd do a fun video where I just talk about some of the lessons I've learned in the past year or so, and I'm probably going to make 2 episodes out of this because I have quite some stuff to talk about. It will be a very relaxed video. We're just gonna sit back, relax, and talk podcast style, and let's see if we can learn from each other, because I would also love to know what you guys have learned in the recent weeks, months, or even years. So let's hop right into it. The first lesson I wanted to talk about is how loving and compassionate presence can heal. And this is something that I've always kind of cognitively known, but it took a while for it to really sink in and for me to properly understand it on an emotional level as well. Presence in a way that is compassionate and loving can expand you. It can cultivate a feeling of softness and surrender to any emotions or thoughts or experiences that we're going through in a way that almost nothing can, and it's necessary for the type of surrender that is needed for healing, for the type of softness that is needed for healing. And that's something I really had to learn. I think a lot of times when we start getting into mindfulness and healing and so forth, which obviously has to do with mindfulness, we tend to first become aware of the negative ways in which we talk to ourselves. And so hanging out in the present moment, especially when you're going through something tough, can be self-hating, and it can show you how crass your self-talk can be. And when we are in the present moment, but we're there with an attitude of ugh and with an attitude of self-loathing, then it constricts, versus with an attitude of loving awareness and compassion, which is something that we can train. All of a sudden we have this expansion, and this expansion and this softening can happen even around the roughest edges of emotions. It can happen around the roughest of experiences, and this type of softening is what facilitates the surrender that is needed for healing. And this softening and surrender can not only come through the way that we talk to ourselves when we are trying to be present with an emotion or an experience, it also comes with the breath. The breath is what we come back to over and over and over again. It is our bread and butter. Each and every single breath that we take in and that we exhale again is an opportunity to get closer to ourselves. It's an opportunity to truly connect with Source. It's an opportunity to connect with the inner divine, and it is an opportunity to fully nourish ourselves and to let go of anything that doesn't nourish us. It is the modality of healing that is the most fascinating to me, because nothing else is needed. All we need is presence, and the breath is the thing that anchors us to the present. The breath is truly magical, because for any work to happen, we need to be grounded in the present, and we need to be grounded in ourselves, and we need to be connected to ourselves. And that's exactly what the breath facilitates. It allows us to open to life, it allows us to soften around rougher edges, and it allows us to surrender to whatever is happening. And the breath also allows us to let go of so many things throughout the day. I know that bigger experiences and emotions need much more than us just sitting there and breathing through them, or at least a lot of times they do. Of course, sometimes all we need is a good session of breath work, but for some things we need a bit more than just meditation, or a bit more than just mindfulness. But a lot of times throughout the day, some of the emotions that come up, like stress or overwhelm, that are very temporary emotions, that are very much specific to this situation, are things where if I focus back on the breath and I focus back on cultivating loving awareness within myself, there is an immediate release of tension in my muscles and in my body. So the breath is an amazing magical tool. And again, this is something that I think we know, but we need to remind ourselves of so that we can cultivate a practice of constantly coming back to this anchor into the present moment, and to know that we are doing magic and we are creating if we are breathing deep down into our bellies and then exhaling again and releasing. The breath is also an excellent tool for nourishing ourselves and doing self-care. I think this is something that I always kind of disregarded, but if I truly pay attention, I can feel how every single cell is being nourished with oxygen and love if I breathe in properly and I do it for me and with the intention of breathing in loving awareness and compassion and breathing it out again. The next thing I learned last year was that grief is very, very physical. It is a very physical thing to happen, and so it is also a very physical thing to process. Grief happens, for me, a lot of times directly in my body. So when I process grief and when I process emotions that are that intense, the process of healing for me also must involve something that is physical. For me, oftentimes that is breath work and yoga, because that's what grounds me in the body and helps me release all the tension. But I think if you've ever gone through any type of grief or really strong emotions or something traumatic, what you notice sometimes is that your body starts shaking to kind of loosen up the tension that is everywhere in your body. And we also all know that trauma and experiences and emotions can store themselves in different parts of the body. For some of us, that's the hips, for example, which especially those people that do yoga will know, because sometimes you will hit a pose and stay there for a minute or so, and while you're breathing into that body part, all of a sudden emotions will come up and will have to be released. And so I think what I've learned is to pay attention to how my body is involved in my emotions, how my body is involved in the experiences that I go through. And with that awareness for it, I can better support it and thus better support my healing journey. So the process of healing grief is a very physical process. It's not something that can be done with the mind. It's something that has to be lived through with the entire body. And so a lot of grounding is necessary, and a lot of movement is necessary, and a lot of being with the breath again. Another thing that I had to learn, and that I am still kind of learning, is that rest is vital, and rest is so important. I never rest enough, and when I do, I try to rest as deeply as possible, but we all know that phenomenon of lying in bed or trying to relax and not really doing it because our mind is still going at 100 miles per hour. So we are taking the time to relax, but we're feeling more stressed because we're not working on something that maybe needs our attention. And so last year, and especially beginning of this year, I've been learning to take more time for myself, to have less in my social calendar unless I really needed, to have less on my plate in general, and to be a bit more relaxed about the things that I want to do. And learning that rest and relaxation is important is something that my body is teaching me, because I am known to run it ragged and to not pay attention to the signs. And so I am teaching myself to pay attention and to rest and relax, not because I deserve it, because I did something or achieved something, but because rest and relaxation is as important as productivity and work. And as long as I do not acknowledge that, I am not nourishing and loving my body in the way that it deserves. I am not loving myself in the way that I deserve. And so sleep is important, getting enough of it and getting good quality sleep. And that has kind of changed how I go to sleep and how I wake up. And it has changed how much time I take to myself and how much time of that is spent just looking into nothingness. That's also something I have learned, to not fill every single moment with entertainment. Because even when I used to relax, I used to be either reading or watching something, or even learning something new by reading a self-help book or by learning a new hobby or something. So relaxing by simply doing nothing, not even making an attempt to meditate, but just sitting there and staring out the window, it sounds like a grandma activity, but it's something that really grounds me and that releases a lot of tension for me. And that has become so important to me, because I am never giving myself enough silence and enough moments to subconsciously just process and to let my mind run and do what it does best, which is store information that's necessary, let go of what's not necessary, and soften again. When I don't relax, my body makes me pay for it, which is what it should be doing. I should be paying for not relaxing and resting enough. And my mind pays me back too. It starts to get really stressed and anxious and overwhelmed. And so rest is necessary, rest is important. Not just so I can do better work, but because I'm worth it, because I should have it no matter if my work after resting is better or as good as if I don't rest. So yeah, rest is important. We should spend more time doing it. and more time slowing down. And with that comes a teaching of patience as well. Patience is something that I think is very painful to learn, and that I think I learn and then forget about again, and learn and forget about again, which is perfectly fine because life is cyclical, healing is cyclical, the body moves in cyclical shapes, and grows in cyclical shapes, and so learning things also is something that we will do over and over again. The same lessons we will have to learn over and over again sometimes, and that is perfectly normal and perfectly okay. So patience is something that I'm learning with a lot of labor pains, but it is incredibly important because if we learn patience, we are able to rest in the present, we are able to find more joy in the present, and we are also able to soften and surrender to the present moment, and we are able to acknowledge when we need rest and to give it to ourselves without having to accomplish a 10 things to do list beforehand so that we feel like we deserve it. One of the most freeing and healing lessons I think we can all learn is to set boundaries with ourselves and with other people, and that's something that I, for the first time ever, truly thought about in the beginning of last year, and it's something that took me quite a while to learn how to do, and I think I'm still learning, but acknowledging the boundaries that we have, learning to become aware of them, and learning to become aware of when they are when they are not being respected is one of the most freeing and healing things we can do. And then to also accept these boundaries and to not walk all over them simply because we think that we should, or because we think we shouldn't have a boundary right here but right there. And then also being brave enough to express those boundaries and to keep expressing them to other people and to ourselves if they are being overstepped over and over again. That is incredibly brave and incredibly necessary. Nothing, I think, teaches me so much about how relationships should be done as the practice of constantly setting boundaries. And when I look back at some of the relationships I've had, and I look back through how I have set boundaries in the past, or more so not done it, and I have let people walk all over me, and I have walked all over myself quite extensively too, it's incredibly painful to look at that, but it teaches me the valuable lesson to never do relationships like that again, to always set boundaries because they are incredibly important. It's what we deserve. We deserve to live in a way that brings us joy, that makes us feel safe and comfortable, and that serves us. And part of that, a huge part of how we should be dealing with our relationships, is to continually and flexibly assert our boundaries, make sure they are respected, love the people who respect them, and to leave the people who don't. It's incredibly, incredibly important to do that, and nothing is as healing in relationships to me as setting those boundaries, be it physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, or mental boundaries. Physical boundaries could be the way that my body is touched, it could be the time that I spend, the energy that I spend with other people and with myself, how I spend my energy, on what I spend it. This is something where especially boundaries that I set with myself come into place because of the boundaries I have to set and how much work I put into personal stuff or into university and so forth, so that I don't walk all over myself and bulldoze myself in an attempt to catch up with a hypothetical, perfectionistic standard that I have of myself. And with that also comes the practice of setting emotional boundaries and mental boundaries with other people, which I think is incredibly tough to learn for someone like me who has always had an anxious attachment style and who also has to deal with codependent patterns that I am still healing. And so to set boundaries with other people, especially emotional boundaries and time boundaries, is incredibly tough because it makes me feel, it makes us who have an anxious attachment style or even a codependent pattern, it makes us feel like we're dying. It makes us feel like we don't deserve the relationships that we're in, like we don't deserve to exist in those relationships, like our entire worth is dependent on being there emotionally for someone else and supporting someone else in that way and giving them as much time as possible and investing our entire being into another person. So to start to set boundaries can feel like death when in actuality it is the attainment of freedom and healing that we needed so that we can protect and heal the relationships that we have, so that we can protect and heal ourselves as well, because we matter in those relationships just as much as other people do. And I think a lot of times our self-sacrificing attitudes in relationships can have very selfish shadow reasons as well that we need to deal with, that we need to look at. And so setting boundaries is also a practice that helps us deal with our attachment patterns that might not be healthy, with our codependency patterns, and it helps us heal in those ways. It's incredibly tough to do, but it is necessary because we deserve healthy relationships and we deserve our own health as well, especially. We deserve to put ourselves first sometimes, and other people deserve to set their boundaries too, which I think can be incredibly hard to accept at first, especially if we're not doing well. But learning to set our own boundaries out of healthy reasons also helps us accept and respect other people's boundaries, notice them, respect them, and act accordingly to them. So I think it's incredibly healing for all people involved in the relationships that we have. I have also learned over the past year that if I have my mornings to myself in stillness, if I have mornings where I can focus on my own rituals, and I can focus on cultivating a softness and stillness within myself, and if I have slow mornings, then almost nothing can throw me off during the day. And it's something really valuable for me to learn because the mornings have become so sacred to me and so nourishing. My entire morning almost always revolves around nourishing myself first and filling that cup in a slow and soft and quiet manner is incredibly rewarding for me, but it also makes the rest of my day filled with so much love, usually. And it allows me to give to other people and to other beings in a more expansive way as well, in a more loving way as well. So having quiet, soft, slow mornings that almost feel like a sacred ritual every single day, it brings me closer to myself, it brings me closer to my own divinity, and that in turn brings me closer to other people's inner divinity, and it brings me closer to love everywhere. Another lesson that I think I knew as a child, but then slowly forgot as I started to enter school, but I kind of rediscovered in the last year, is that stories save my life. Every single day. I think we learn so much through books and stories, be it read to us, or be it that we read them ourselves, or be it that we tell other people stories. I think it is incredibly important to live with stories, to make them a daily occurrence, because learning through stories is magical, and I think it has a bigger impact than I always think that it will. Every story has so many layers and layers upon layers that we can dive into, and that I think we subconsciously start to process when we hear the story first. And so each story impacts us for years and years to come in a very subconscious way. Stories have often changed how I think, how I feel, how I act on a daily basis. And so stories that other beings have created, but also the stories that I create, are incredible teachers to me that are full of so much wisdom that I can let just subconsciously soak for months and months and years on end. And every single story I will draw something different out of, depending on the point in my journey that I am at. And I think there can be stories found in nature, there can be stories found in animals, there can be stories found in books, in podcasts. Everywhere we look, there is a story to be told. And that's something beautiful that I have kind of realized again in the last year as I've started to read again more, as I have started to spend more time in nature and with animals again. It's something that brings me an incredible amount of joy and growth. Healing happens in communities, and building communities and safe spaces is where it's at. Creating safe spaces, creating communities, that's what it's all about. Being in loving presence with other people is where the healing happens, is where the peace happens, where the expansion happens, where the safety happens, and the acceptance and the compassion. Being in loving presence with other beings is the best spiritual practice to me. It is the thing that truly heals us. Being in presence with other people, with other beings in general, is incredibly nourishing to every single person in that room. And so there is no better spiritual practice than being present and mindful and loving with other people, being compassionate with other people, and learning from other people. So creating communities and creating sacred and safe spaces for people and other beings is my main priority, and always has been and probably always will be. Again, related to that is another lesson, which also is kind of interwoven into all the other lessons I've already talked about, which is that nourishing myself always should come first. I know that this is a lesson that I have not fully integrated yet, or more so a lesson that, again, I'm learning in a very cyclical manner. So I go through weeks and months where I know that I should nourish myself and take care of myself first before I try to do anything else or be with anyone else and nourish them. But some months I also completely forget about that, and I completely push myself to my limits and totally forget that I should come first in my own life, because this is my own life. So I should be taking care of myself, and I am worthy of being taken care of by myself in the way that I take care of other people as well. But it is incredibly important to me, and has become even more important to me throughout the first quarter of this year, especially as I was noticing that I was overworking myself and was being more stressed and anxious than I usually am. And this does not mean that I need to totally abandon everyone and go into my cave and not come out until I'm a perfectly nourished and loving human being. And it does not mean that nourishing myself needs to come before I can love someone else or before I can receive love from someone else. That is not what I mean. I mean that I should take care of myself and make sure that my cup is full before I try to completely exert myself in my work or give to someone else who needs more than just my half-assed presence. And sometimes nourishing myself means being with other people, means nourishing someone else. Sometimes nourishing myself means being by myself and just doing whatever brings me joy and whatever I need to do. And sometimes nourishing myself just means 5 minutes of stillness. And sometimes it's 2 weeks of stillness that I need by myself, but whatever it means, it should come first. It should be a priority, is what I mean. It should be a priority over the work that I do, and over the expectations that I set and that I put on myself. Another thing that I have learned through overworking myself especially is that productivity and achievements in the external world especially can be a good thing and they can be a bad thing, depending on the reason for doing them. So productivity and external achievements never equal progress. They never equal success. They can, but they don't need to. Sometimes they are a form of running away from ourselves and running away from the reality that we are living in. And being grounded in reality should always be the priority over productivity and achieving something. That's something, again, that I learned in cyclical waves, but that I have started to learn last year, and I think is incredibly important, because I used to put all my emphasis on achieving as much as possible, reading as many books as possible, getting the best grades, getting invited to as many workshops as possible, and putting out videos and so forth. And I saw that as a progress of myself. I saw that as personal success. And sometimes it was, but sometimes it was also a form of running away from the reality of the pandemic that we were in, of the reality of my anxiety. Sometimes it was a form of running away from my own mind. And so I need to pay attention to my intention and my reasoning behind doing certain things. I am allowed to have quote-unquote negative reasons for doing things like running away from myself, but if I am aware of that, I can consciously do it. And usually I no longer want to, or I can find another way of running away from myself that doesn't run my body ragged. But yes, productivity is not progress, it is not success, it is a tool. And that I should keep in mind, and learn, and further learn, so that I can focus on what is truly progress and success to me, which is something different for everyone, but I should never get it confused. In the past year, I have also learned that changing other people is impossible. And if it is possible, it is not always something I should desire to do, or want to do. Changing myself is where the magic happens, and changing myself is what I should be focusing on, and changing myself is incredible and amazing. I think this is something that's incredibly hard to learn, again, for someone who has still remnants of anxious attachment style and codependent patterns to heal through. And And it's hard to learn, I think, for anyone who is in very close, intimate relationships, because we will inevitably run into incompatibilities or run into things about other people that we do not like and don't want to deal with. Because they're either things we hate in ourselves or things we hate in general or things we find uncomfortable and that scare us. And so our first instinct is to jump in and try to change the other person. Sometimes we might also find that someone is going through a problem and we immediately want to jump in and change something about the other person or their situation to help. But unless we're asked, we shouldn't do so without consent, and sometimes it's also just impossible, and it's not always the right thing to do. Sometimes what we need to do is to either change ourselves, assert boundaries, or leave in case the incompatibility is too strong. But it is never our responsibility and is not something that we need to do to change other people. What we should be focusing on is changing ourselves. There is always a bigger, more loving, more aware, more compassionate version of ourselves that is waiting just around the corner. A version of ourselves that we still have to get to know, that we are able to develop and create as we go along. And that's a truly magical process. So we should be spending our time and effort in doing so. We are creating all of these future versions of ourselves right now as we speak. That's what we should be focusing on, and that's where the magic happens. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about was that we are entitled to our own timeline and to our own pace. There is no need to grow, work, or be as fast or as slow as anyone else. We have our own pacing, we have our own timeline in our journey, we have our own version of our experiences and the way that we go through them and at which pace we go through them. And that is completely fine. There is no need to catch up with anyone or to slow down so we're on the same timeline as someone else. We are entitled to do things at our own speed. Now, what is necessary to become aware of is what that speed actually is, what authentically is my speed. Because I think we're, all of us, taught to live fast and to grow fast and to do as many things as possible at the same time. And some of us find out that our authentic speed is indeed that fast speed, and some of us find out that our pace and our timeline is actually much slower than that, or it's somewhere in the middle. And so we have to do the work to become aware of what is actually our pace of living, and to slowly start inching closer toward that pace of living. And I know that sometimes life does not allow for us to live at our own personal pace, but I think we can make an effort to always be close to it and to be in it as often as we can. It's what we deserve, it's how we love ourselves better, and it's how we find more joy in ourselves. It's how we get closer to our own authenticity. Alright, I just checked my list of the other things I wanted to talk about, and there is still so much to talk about. So I will put a stop to it for today, and I will make another episode or 2 episodes to talk about the other things that I wanted to talk about. Again, I hope that this brought you something, that it reminded you of something you already know, and I would love to know some of your thoughts, some of your answers, some of your lessons that you've learned, so please leave them down below, and I'll try to be back with another episode of this as soon as I can. And yeah, I love you guys so much. I'll see you very soon. Bye.